Usually when people ask me, what do you do? And I say, I'm a typeface designer, and like, what is that? And like, do we really need more fonts? But yes, because it's the voice and we have different things to say.
Imagine a world where all fonts were the same, where words wore a uniform, where letters spoke in monotone. The local newsstand would look a whole lot duller.
If you go to a newspaper kiosk, you might see 5 different newspapers there. A person who is just a regular reader, a regular citizen, with no knowledge of newspaper design or typography will be able to tell you, this newspaper is down market. This newspaper is for people perhaps with less education who would like the thrill of murder stories, a little sex, a little of this, a little of that, sensationalism. Then you gravitate towards newspapers like The Guardian in London, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Die Zeit, or the Frankfurter Allgemein in Germany, and all of them in 10 seconds tell you, come here to read. We are serious, gravitas. How do you do that? Without reading one word, typography. In 10 seconds, the typography conveys all kinds of things to people without having read a word.
Here's another way to look at it. Imagine the New York Times masthead changed from NYT Cheltenham to Papyrus, or BBC screen furniture revamped in Hobo, or the Hindu in brush script. It doesn't quite have the same feel to it. That's because fonts don't just house words, they can affect their meaning.
If you look at your regular local newspapers, be it the New York Times, Hindi newspaper, Le Figaro in France, and you presented those newspapers in an unfamiliar typeface, your understanding would be highly confused. It's like you suddenly talking in a different accent, and it might mean I'd be thinking about what you're saying in a very different way. So there's a sort of invisibility to the choice of fonts, and you become used to associating certain kinds of voice with certain kinds of typefaces.
When you pick up a newspaper, when you turn on the TV station, you want to be able to believe what this agency is telling you. So there is that trust factor that you have to build in, and the typefaces have to perform on that subconscious level, so that when you are reading, you are believing.
There are some fonts that provoke more of a reaction than others. 2 months ago, one of Australia's oldest newspapers did something that had the world of typographers pounding their keyboards. The Sydney Morning Herald published a front-page story in Comic Sans. The font some have called a crime against design. Thousands took to Twitter to scoff at the 183-year-old Daily's design decision. It wouldn't be the first time Comic Sans was the target of the public's wrath. Since its birth 20 years ago, the font has suffered from an almost universal disdain, complete with a campaign to ban it.
Comic Sans, in a sense, I equate it to fashion. I mean, if you see Lady Gaga appearing, some people will think, oh my God, this is the fashion that I would like to wear. And then somebody else would say, my God, who is dressing this woman? Why is she appearing like this? And so it's the same with type. There are people who believe that this is not a font, that should not be considered typography. I think that there is a place for Comic Sans. And I have never used it myself, but perhaps the opportunity will come for me to use it. Why not?
I think Comic Sans was, some designers are more sensitive to it than others. I don't use it, but it doesn't make me uncomfortable that it exists. I think variety in design is good.
Ever since the 15th century, when a German entrepreneur called Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, which made publishing on a mass scale possible for the first time, typographers have been designing letters and numbers because one font does not fit them all. Today, another revolution is underway, the digital one. Different platforms mean different requirements, and that means different design demands for people who are in a bigger hurry now than they ever were.
Today, we are in the midst of what I call the media quartet. You have the phone, you have the tablet, you have the online, and you have the print. It's 24 hours. It's the journalism of interruptions. People want the news when it's happening. Typography is going to become extremely important in how you present stories in these platforms. And so you have to adapt to interruptions, you have to adapt to quick glances, and bolder type, sans serif type will do better for these glances. than type that is a little bit more difficult to tell the difference, the nuances between the letters. So that's a real challenge starting right now.
A challenge for designers creating fonts in Latin script, but for the multitude of countries that rely on calligraphic script, creating standardized, nationally recognized fonts is even more of a challenge. Think of the billion people who get their information in Mandarin, the 260 million who speak Hindi and read in Devanagari script, 160 million Russians, and 11 million Greeks who read in Cyrillic. In the age of the digital revolution, Latin font may be hegemonic, but it's not representative, and many countries are starved for new typefaces.
Unfortunately, there are other languages where the creation of fonts is minimal. And I'm always interested in seeing how young designers who know that language, type designers, would come and create more fonts, because there are many languages, lesser used languages around the world, where there are not many fonts available for those languages. And that is sad.
One of the big challenges when it comes to Arabic typography, in the Arab world we have this very rich calligraphic heritage. But then there was this big break, because you jump into our modern times and you look at the digital fonts, and all of a sudden that rich heritage was not properly translated to today's. So the biggest challenge when it came to Arabic fonts is really quantity. That has started to change very recently, because brands have been aware that they need to have a visual distinct personality as part of their branding.
What's happening in the world right now, and it's affecting our languages and the way we speak and the way we design our languages, is that it's becoming globally generic. When it becomes globally generic, you lose local complexity. And in fact, it's the interest of broad generics to replace local complexity. So I think the real challenge for us is to preserve that, to look for what heritage has led to a certain kind of language, and go back and try and reinforce and capture that.
Because it's not just in the content of words that meaning is generated, it's also in their form. And although good journalism is ultimately about the facts, it's not just the literal meaning of the words that convey the truth.